So in my 10 years of working with dialogue, I've really experienced and observed both obviously the benefit and the value of the inquiry that takes place, but also the skills that we develop during a dialogue practice. And they can kind of be clustered into these three skill sets. So that's thinking skills. And obviously, we're here to think about new thinking, but we can also look at those skills as critical, creative, and system thinking skills. And then obviously we're coming together to communicate with each other. So sometimes when we think about communication, it might just be this one way, like I'm doing to you now. I'm offering up information in this one-way exchange, but in dialogue, it's a two-way or multi-way communication. And in that, we really practice and really develop our listening skills. And I'm going to go into more depth in listening, as it's a really fundamental skill and practice in a dialogue. But we also are able to develop our voicing skills. And by voicing, I mean the ability to find our authentic voice, and through voicing, be able to better understand our thoughts and our feelings. And what we find in a dialogue is that people that perhaps in other situations haven't felt enabled to use their voice are able to find it. And on the flip side, those people that are often tend to dominate in a situation learn to step back and really understand about listening to other people. So this kind of voicing and listening work together in sort of harmony in a way. And then the body is a really important part of a dialogue practice. So really by cultivating attention and awareness to what's happening in the moment, including our body in that, we're really developing our emotional intelligence. And then finally, the relating skills. So as I've said, listening is a fundamental skill and practice in dialogue. And so through that listening, without judgment and with the intention that we bring in a dialogue practice, we're able to develop empathy for other people. And that empathy helps increase trust and collaboration that can really support community building. So those are sort of an overview of the skills and benefits that we get through a sustained dialogue practice. And I wanted to bring in the inner development goals here. And for those of you that haven't come across these before, they've been co-created through a global consultation, and this framework was launched in 2021. So for me, it's really encouraging that in the 10 years that I've been working with different ways to share these skills and create experiences for people around some of these skills and behaviors, this has been developed, and it was developed in response to the Sustainable Development Goals. So recognizing that we're not making as much progress as we need to on the SDGs because so much of what is needed is inner work. So David Bohm said, of course, the inner work and outward work go hand in hand. And if you're not familiar, this framework is these 5 different dimensions. So being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and acting. And under that, these 23 different skills and behaviors. And so in a dialogue practice and process, we're able to develop all of these skills and behaviors and touch on all of these different dimensions. So for me, this is really important to see the relationship between dialogue practice and these skills and behaviors that have been identified as essential for overcoming our complex challenges. So why do we need to use these skills? I mean, if you agree that they are essential to overcome the complex challenges, I think it's really nicely distilled in this quote from Einstein, who was a contemporary of Bohm. And he said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used to create them. So we need this new thinking. And how do we develop it? And when I talk about thinking, I'm not talking about thinking alone. So although we can have the spirit of dialogue within ourselves, this is really about how do we come together and think together, which is something that perhaps we're not doing enough of today. We're very busy, we're polarized, there's conflict. So how do we really come together and think together? And that's what David Bohm was really interested in. So who was David Bohm? If you don't know, he was a theoretical physicist, and he was known for his quantum theory of the implicate and explicate order. And I am not an expert in that at all, but it is related to his dialogue practice. And it is quite interesting if you're interested to read his book on wholeness and the implicate order. Some of it's understandable. But he was born in America. In 1951, he was forced to leave America for un-American activities, and then he went on to live and teach in Brazil for a while. And then from 1957 until he died, he actually lived here in London, where I am, and taught at Birkbeck College. And his philosophy of dialogue grew out of his interest in consciousness and how our thinking creates our reality. So for David Bohm, thought was a system. And so these are some of the things that he proposed about thought as this system. So for him, thought is not fresh, direct perception. It's literally that which has been thought. So it's in the past and it's carried forward into the present through our memories. So I'll talk a bit later about his distinction between thought and thinking. And for him, our thought system is also inclusive of feelings. So these are in the form of latent emotional experiences. And again, I'm going to talk a bit about the difference between emotions and feelings in a dialogue practice. And then for him, then this feeling and thought form a structure of these neurophysiological reflexes. And what he means by that is that very often in the moment when we're in a situation, we're just responding from these past thoughts and these past feelings. And so it's a kind of gut reaction response that often is not very helpful. And then also, interestingly, for David Bohm, he saw human artifacts, so cars, buildings, musical instruments, pieces of art, anything that we create is actually part of our thought system, but that's our thought manifested in fixed concrete form. So this is where we really look at how he thought our thinking is creating our reality. And finally, he thought that thought and knowledge is primarily collective. So although we are this kind of private mixture of values, meanings, and intentions, that's actually part of a much bigger field, an unbroken field of mutually informing thought and our collective values, our collective meaning and intentions. So we can start to see this kind of thought as a system really includes much more than what we often consider as just thinking with our minds. And so for him, the challenge that he was facing and why he thought dialogue was so important to this system of thought is that he believed that we've become fragmented. So for him, like in his words, the whole ecological problem is due to thought because we've thought the world is there for us to exploit and that it's infinite. So our thinking is creating the behaviors that are destroying our planet. And we've become fragmented within ourselves, within organizations and societies, and lost sight of this cohesive whole, lost sight of the understanding and experience that everything is interconnected and interrelated, which is what we see in indigenous ways of thinking and being in the world, that we are all connected. So for him, yeah, it's no accident that this fragmentary form of thought is leading to this widespread range of crises. So this is the challenge that we're faced with, this fragmentation of thought, and we can really see this playing out in the breakdown of our relationships, in polarization, the destruction of the planet, and all this suffering. So it's our thought. And interestingly, Bohm said that we're being driven by agendas that are acting faster and independent from our conscious choice. So we could call that agenda the system. So our thinking isn't able to keep up with the system. And I think that's why a lot of us feel quite powerless faced with these multiple crises, because we just can't think fast enough. And so for Bohm, there's this real power in the activity of thought that occurs in a dialogue. But it's really important to say that Bohm made a distinction between, where does our thought come from in our mind and this mechanical mind versus a creative mind. So in a dialogue, we're trying to access our creative mind as our source of thought. And that's the creative mind that's capable of insight, originality, primary imagination, and as he says here, perceiving new differences and new similarities tending to new orders and structures. So when we start to see things in this new way, we can then create these new orders, these new systems, these new structures. But in contrast, he talks about this mechanical mindset, so the habitually applied preconceptions and prejudices, which you might find, in your everyday work or personal life. You might recognize this in people that just say the same thing again and again, or even when they come together to kind of think of new ideas and come up with solutions, they're not really deviating from their agenda. They're sort of consciously or unconsciously maintaining the status quo. So this is the mechanical mindset that keeps us trapped in the same systems of thought and behavior. So it's really, really vital that we can develop our creative minds so that we can create this new thinking that Einstein and Bohm are both talking about. And then the final bit I'm going to share about Bohm's vision and philosophy of dialogue is around meaning. So for Bohm, the meaning of the word dialogue, dialogus, was the flow of meaning. So when people came together, it's about sharing meaning to create new thinking together. One of my favorite quotes from Bohm is that a change of meaning is a change of being. So we can change our very being and our behaviors by changing the meaning that we have about things. And that this shared meaning is really the glue or cement that holds people and societies together. So again, in our professional or personal lives, we might have experienced times when we make an assumption that everybody has the same meaning about something. And then if we don't make time to really test that assumption, we can go off in very different directions with lots of misunderstandings, conflict, or unsuccessful outcomes, things that we have to redo. So taking the time to really come together and make sure that we understand and mutually have this shared meaning is really important. So just to summarize then, so this vision of dialogue that David Bohm had is really about bringing people together to create coherence, so to bring back this cohesive whole that everything is interconnected and interrelated, like we see in systems thinking, to really share meaning, to be able to uncover insights and create new thinking.